All right, let's watch this last video here. Ben Shapiro. Oh, I can't wait.
You own a pencil factory. I'm a worker in that pencil factory. You can have all the machinery, you can buy all the raw materials you want, but without me, and presumably many others like me, to assemble the pencils, all you would have is a pile of wood, yellow paint, graphite, rubber, and aluminum.
Okay.
That would be worth it. And that is worth less than the pencil when you try and sell it. And yet, all of that value added by labor, apart from the wages that you give me, which, if we're being honest, there is a major power imbalance in our ability to negotiate that.
If all that putting the pencil together requires is basic use of your prefrontal cortex, then yes, your labor is alienable at lower rates than if you are a doctor. That's not the fault of the person who owns the machinery.
But if you didn't have workers like me and your pencil factory, and you were just one man.
But I do. I have millions of people who are.
No, it's not the fault of the people who owns the machinery. It's the fault of, the fact that the labor of a doctor makes more than the labor of someone who works in a pencil factory, I guess, is just like, that should be the case in socialism too. But the reason, well, then I don't even know what I'm debunking then. I'm debunking him saying a doctor should make more than a pencil worker. I agree, Ben Shapiro.
But if you didn't have workers like me and your pencil factory, and you were just one man.
But I do. I have millions of people who are willing to do that voluntarily for me.
It's not voluntary if you have the same class who owns everything also owns the means of subsistence. It's a work or die dichotomy, and you have to work at well below the value that you actually create, or you die, right? It's not like you have the choice of working for full value or the choice to die, and then you have the choice to work at a tiny, 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 tiny infinitesimal fraction of what you actually create, and then the rest of that value goes to your boss, who uses it to buy off the government and buy the media and buy these sources of political and cultural power. The only choice is between starve or continue to create more and more wealth and power for the imperialist capitalist class. Those are your choices.
If you were just one person trying to
what a choice. And the illusion of free contract, Marx is big about this. The illusion of the exchange between capitalist and worker being a free contract, like any exchange between commodity owners, right? What capitalist ideologues like Ben Shapiro will say is me exchanging this black pencil for this blue pencil is an exchange of commodities. It's the same thing when a capitalist meets with a worker on the labor market, right? The worker exchanges his commodity, labor power, in exchange for wages. But if you go back historically, for example, in the United States, you have primitive accumulation. So you have this group of capitalists hoarding for themselves all of the resources and wealth while accumulating vast amounts of capital using the absolute most brutal, horrible forms of subjugation and plunder. In the United States, it was the massive genocide of Native Americans and putting on their land these plantations, which created vast amounts of capital for capitalists in the North and for capitalists in Europe. So this is how they accumulated all their wealth. After this, the motion of the system puts workers in a situation now where they have to sell their labor to these people who have accumulated all of this capital using genocide and slavery. So now we've been living for 200 years plus with a mode of production which has all these negative externalities, all these negative things and how it works in its motion, but also where the mass of society is slaving away to make more and more and more wealth from these people who stole all the resources originally through killing, plundering, genociding, and enslaving people. And that is an entirely irrational mode of production in many ways, but mostly because it's set, or not mostly, but one of the ways is because they say, you have a free choice. You have a free choice to enter into this exchange with the capitalist. When the exchange between you and the capitalist, the signing of the contract, is the illusion of choice, right? And what we said, you only have the option to die if you don't do that. But because they make you sign a contract, because they make you enter into a market exchange before you go into work and make more and more wealth from these people who obtained the wealth originally through killing and slavery, they can portray it as an exchange between commodity owners. They can lie, and that is what Ben Shapiro is doing. The long, time-honored tradition of capitalists lying to the mass of society and telling them that they have, a vast choice in what they can do. Coincidentally, Ben Shapiro, someone born into, relative comfort, who used that comfort and status to work his way and go to Harvard, a very expensive college. And now, he's looking down on everybody who isn't in that situation and saying, oh, you have the choice, just become a doctor. Like, yeah, that's not in the cards for everybody, Ben.
Assemble pencils. You're not going to get very far. You need workers.
And also, I work in the healthcare industry, and it is massively corrupt because of profit incentive and the fact that all of the healthcare institutions in the U.S. are not trying to provide you healthcare, but are trying to make a buck off you. So, even if you do become a doctor, you're going to realize all these horrible issues that there are with capitalism.
Capital needs labor infinitely more than labor needs capital. That's why you have worker cooperatives where the workers...
That was silly of this guy to say, because what happens when you have these social relationships, right? So what the capitalists have hoarded, what they originally acquired via genocide and slavery, is the means of subsistence, like housing, food, water, the things you need to survive, and the means of production, tools, factories, things that are used to make things. And, originally they gained it through plunder and slavery, but now, the capital has been created through the labor of workers working in the factories of capitalists. And part of what happens when you're born into these relations, right, and you haven't seen production carried out in any other way other than capitalist production, is you start to get, what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, or what Marx, I don't know what Marx actually called it, but where people associate what capital is within the social relations of capital with what it actually is, right? They can't see what it actually is materially. They only see the thing as it exists under capitalism. So the means of production, the tools and factories and buildings, as well as the means of subsistence, the things we need to eat and drink to survive, rather than calling them what they actually are, people call them capital. And they associate them with capital. And what does that do? That causes them to associate them with the capitalist. You can't have tools and factories and buildings and food and water and shelter without capitalists. We call all that stuff capital, so therefore it belongs to them. Like, no, all of that stuff could exist without the capitalists. It's just the fact that in our minds we see it as capital because we haven't seen anything else, because we've been born into a world where we serve under the people who obtain that capital via murder and genocide and plunder and slavery, as I've said.
I fundamentally disagree on the distinction between capital and labor. Capital is just a term for money. If you're talking about money...
No, it's not. Capital is money used to make more money. And that any economics class will tell you that, even a Western economics class. Not like a Marxist econ class will tell you that capital is money used to make more money, and it doesn't become capital until it is put in motion, until the intention is made to advance that money as capital, to use it to buy more tools, more means of production, or to use it to buy more labor power, more power from your workers. And the only way that capital, that dollar, can make more money is through the labor of a worker. Right? If there are no workers, if you can't, use that dollar to transform it into the labor power of a worker and then steal that worker's value in the mode of production, that dollar's useless. Right? You can run around with your dollar all you want, but if you don't pay that dollar to a worker, you're not going to be able to turn that dollar into capital.
Money does not grow from the ground. Money only has value because it was traded for labor at one point, or the products of labor. So if I take my money and I buy a machine, I have invested my labor in doing that because I didn't get the money from nowhere. Even if I got it from my parents didn't get the money from nowhere. The people who built the machines required me to trade something of value to them in order for me to obtain the machines. The people who invented the machines required people to pay them in order to get the patent to that machine so they could build the machine. The problem that I'm seeing in what you're saying is you have still failed. If what you're talking about is a system of voluntarism, you still have not named any area in which we disagree, and yet you're telling me that you're a socialist and I'm a free marketer. So one of us has got this wildly wrong, and I'm pretty sure it's not me.
Me, I know what socialism is. No, you don't, right? You just said that socialism is a society where labor is voluntary. That has nothing to do with what Marx or what socialist parties of the past have ever pushed. And maybe you would know that, Ben, if you didn't have this enormous ego and you weren't so incredibly intellectually dishonest, and if you actually cared about getting to the bottom of the facts and actually hearing about what the smartest thinkers of all time have said, rather than just owning teenagers in debates. I mean, I know it's Ben Shapiro, so it makes sense to make fun of him and hate on him, but he really is such a piece of garbage, like pseudo-intellectual.
one person trying to redefine anything. The differentiation I and many others like me draw between socialism and capitalism is that under capitalism, when you as the owner of the factory, you give me a wage. The wage could be $7.25, it could be $15, it could be whatever an hour, right? But you give me a wage. All the additional profit above the made from selling the pencils or whatever good you produce above what is reinvested into the company ultimately goes to you or the investors, those who own shares in the means of production.
Right.
Under socialism, those people are the workers, and the example I give, again, is cooperative enterprise.
No, those are the people who are investing the risk. So if they carry the risk, then they get the benefit.
The only risk that a capitalist takes is becoming a worker again. What's the risk? Think about what's the risk he's talking about right now. He's saying capitalists take all this risk, right, because they invest all their money. So what happens if they lose the money they invested, Ben? They have to go get a job? Like the rest of society? Oh no! I'm so sad for them. If their plant goes under, that's risk for the workers too. The workers are going to get laid off or lose their jobs. How is that not a risk? Right? Everybody's in the same situation. It's just the capitalist goes from his high and mighty status as an owner of the means of production to being like the rest of us and not owning the means of production. Right? And that's a risk for you. But for the rest of us who are already workers, that just sounds like becoming a worker again. Tough shit. Deal with it, buddy. You should be a worker anyways. You guys make all this money by not doing anything.
Owner of the factory carries the risk, therefore he gets the benefit. The workers in the company you mentioned, if that company were to go bankrupt, they would carry the risk as well as the benefit. If the company goes bankrupt and this guy has to pay off all of his debts, the worker may lose his job, but he's not the one who's going to incur the debt of having gone bankrupt. If you incur risk...
Oh, it's because of the debt, right? He would have debt because working people don't have debt, right? See, I have $100,000 in student loan debt. What about credit card debt or housing debt? Or all of the different, or medical debt. You know, medical debt has gone up billions of dollars in the U.S. during COVID. What about all these different ways that capitalists have now invented to increase their profits by putting this burden of debt on the working class in every single way imaginable, in every aspect of society, including higher education? All right, but no, we should feel bad for the capitalist because, you know, he would have to pay off his debts if his company went bankrupt.
Then you're the one who pays the downside. The worker does not pay the downside. Okay, it is the investor who pays the downside, who invested in all the machinery, who sunk millions of dollars into making your labor productive. Because guess what? Your labor is without that machinery. Gunk.
Guess what his money is without my labor? Gunk. Gunk. Oh, wow, that's crazy how it works both ways. Have you never thought about that because you're a pampered little bitch who's never worked a day in your life? Yeah, if the capitalist doesn't have any value if all of his labor goes away either. See, that argument works both ways, Benny boy. And actually, if you had the means of production organized, the workers could still use it. The workers could still produce. You could remove the capitalists, and in fact, you know, look at Jeff Bezos. You know, all of his corporate, you know, all of his factories and all of his means of production are managed by other people. You think he goes around to every single Amazon store every day and manages it? Right? If Jeff Bezos stopped doing stuff, and I imagine he doesn't do that much anyways, if we just shot Jeff Bezos to the moon in his spaceship and left him there, Amazon would continue to function the same way. If you put all of Jeff Bezos' workers in a spaceship and sent them there, Jeff Bezos would just be a worthless guy. All of his money would stop coming in immediately. Because you can't get around the fact that capitalists create no value, right? You can say, oh, but risk, you know, but they'll have to become a worker again if they lose their company. That's a lot of risk. And like, oh, you know, if the capitalists didn't pay you your wages, you know, you wouldn't have wages. Did you ever think about that? Like, yeah, I did. That's why we're socialists. That's why we want to organize production, organize the means of production in a way that are rational, and organize it in a way that benefits those whose labor actually creates value.
Nothing. You don't have a pencil to put together. You don't got the wood. You don't got the paint. You don't got the rubber. You don't got the metal. Got nothing.
And all of that, the wood, the paint, the rubber, who was it cut down by, Ben? Who cut it down and brought it all together into the factory, shaved down the wood into the size of a pencil? Is it capitalists who do that? Because I was under the impression that was all done by workers from the point where the raw materials are gotten out of the ground to the point where the commodity is brought to the store and sold on the market. all of that is done by workers. You know, I get that you get really triggered, you get really offended when people explain to you how you're useless and how you provide no value to society, but it's just a scientific fact, dude. You can play all the mental gymnastics you want. You're never going to be able to find a way where capitalists contribute value because they don't, right? You can boo-hoo about, oh, the risk, you know, they might lose their $1 million company and become a worker again. Tough shit. You know, that's what 95% of the world does every day. You know, the only reason that you think that sounds so horrible is because you've lived in a pampered life of luxury your whole life.
Nothing, right? You're sitting there, standing outside, twiddling your thumbs. It required somebody to invest. Who do you think put more in? The guy who spent millions of dollars buying all the machinery, leasing the place, making sure there was a management structure, doing the LLC formation, making sure all the tax code was in compliance, or you standing outside because you can stick a piece of...
And also they don't even do any of that anymore. And they didn't do that from the beginning, right? The giant corporations have legal teams and hedge funds who manage their assets and who, you know, look into all the legal information, which also increases the entry to the market then, right? So then only people with vast amounts of wealth can enter the market because they're the only people who can afford to do all this market research and hire legal teams and hire a management staff and all these various things. So it generally ends up being people who are born into money. Money, which represents value, you know, which can be traded for commodities, which also have value based on labor, created by labor. Right, it might be, he's also trying to do this trick like, oh, let's go a long time ago, right? My parents gave me the money, but that money came from labor, so therefore now that money's mine. Yeah, your parents probably exploited the labor. They were probably piece of shit capitalists who created no value and just stole a bunch from the working class like you. That doesn't mean that, you know, all of a sudden that all of Jeff Bezos and all of Steve Jobs or whatever, all the money they inherited from mommy and daddy, all of a sudden didn't come from labor. Still came from a worker, buddy. I realize, you know, the capitalist class gets really, really triggered when you explain to them how they don't actually do any labor. But facts don't care about your feelings, so that's all I got to say about that.